I never announced I was leaving. I didn't write a letter. I didn't leave a note on the counter explaining myself or defending my choice. I just waited until they were all gone, packed everything I owned into a rental truck, and disappeared from the house I'd lived in for most of my adult life. It wasn't impulsive. I'd been thinking about it for years, actually, turning the idea over in my mind during all those late nights when I was the only one awake handling whatever crisis had emerged that week. I'd imagined what it would feel like to just not be there anymore, to not be the person everyone called first, to not be the one expected to drop everything and fix whatever had broken or soothe whatever hurt feelings had surfaced or mediate whatever argument had erupted over something that wouldn't matter in a month. But I never actually believed I'd do it. Leaving felt like a betrayal even when staying felt like slow erasure. I'm 34 now. I moved back home when I was 26 after my father had his first heart attack. It was supposed to be temporary. 3 months, maybe 6, just until he was back on his feet and my mother felt steady again. My younger sister was still in college then. My older brother had just gotten married and moved 2 states away. I was the logical choice. I was single. I worked remotely. I had flexibility. So I came home. That was 8 years ago. My father recovered relatively quickly from that first heart attack. Within 4 months, he was back to his normal routine, back to work part-time, back to his weekend projects in the garage. But by then, I had already become integrated into the household infrastructure in ways that made leaving complicated. I was handling the bills because my mother found the online portals confusing. I was doing the grocery shopping because it was easier for me to go after work than for her to make a special trip. I was managing my father's medications and his follow-up appointments because he kept forgetting to refill prescriptions or missing checkups. It happened so gradually that I didn't recognize it as a permanent shift. I kept thinking I'd move out once things stabilized. Once my father had gone 6 months without any health scares. Once my mother seemed less anxious. Once my sister graduated and got settled in her own life. But there was always something. My sister graduated and moved back home because she couldn't find a job right away. That stretched into 2 years while she figured out what she wanted to do. My father had a second, smaller heart attack. My mother developed anxiety about being alone in the house overnight, so me moving out became something that caused her visible distress whenever I mentioned it. My brother visited maybe twice a year. He had his own family now, his own obligations. Everyone understood that. No one questioned whether he should be contributing more or visiting more frequently or helping manage the endless small tasks that kept a household running. But when I mentioned moving out, I was being selfish. I was abandoning them. I was putting my own desires ahead of family need. The word they used most often was disappointing. I think the thing that's hardest to explain is how reasonable it all seemed in the moment. Every individual request made sense. Every crisis felt legitimate. My father's health was fragile. My mother did struggle with anxiety. My sister was going through a difficult period in her life and needed support. But together, over time, it created a situation where my entire existence became organized around being available. I stopped making plans that couldn't be immediately cancelled. I stopped dating anyone who didn't understand that I might have to suddenly leave in the middle of dinner to handle something at home. I stopped thinking about what I wanted my life to look like, because that kind of thinking felt indulgent when measured against everything my family was dealing with. I became a function rather than a person. I was the one who handled things. The one who was always there. The one who could be counted on. Until I couldn't anymore. The shift started about a year ago. I started noticing things I'd been too close to see clearly before. Small things at first. The way my sister would complain about being bored and having nothing to do, but never offered to help with any of the household tasks I was managing. The way my mother would talk about how overwhelmed she felt, but then spend 3 hours scrolling through Facebook instead of dealing with the bill I'd asked her to review. I noticed that my father's health anxiety seemed to spike primarily when I mentioned doing something for myself. A weekend trip I was thinking about taking. A friend's wedding in another state. Suddenly his chest would hurt, or he'd feel dizzy, or he'd need me to drive him to an urgent care appointment that would ultimately reveal nothing concerning. I noticed that my brother would call me to complain about how stressed he was with work and family obligations, but the conversation would somehow always end with him asking me to handle something for our parents. Could I make sure Dad had his prescriptions filled? Could I talk to Mom about her anxiety because she'd been calling him more frequently and it was affecting his marriage? The thing that really clarified it, though, was when I got sick. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a bad flu that turned into a respiratory infection. But I was genuinely ill for about 2 weeks. Fever, body aches, coughing so hard I'd vomit. I couldn't get out of bed for days. And no one helped me. My sister brought me water a few times but complained that coming into my room made her nervous about getting sick. My mother checked on me periodically but seemed frustrated that I wasn't able to do the things I normally did. My father didn't come near me at all because of his compromised immune system. I understand that. I do. Logically, I understand all of it. But I was alone in that room for 2 weeks, barely able to stand, and no one thought to bring me actual meals. No one organized my medications or made sure I was taking them on schedule the way I did for my father. No one called a doctor when my fever spiked to 104. I had to do that myself, shaking and delirious, because it occurred to no one else that I might need medical attention. My brother called once during that time, not to check on me, but to ask if I had been able to handle something for our parents' insurance. When I said I'd been too sick, he sounded annoyed. When I finally recovered enough to get out of bed, everything had fallen apart. Bills were overdue because no one had thought to pay them. The house was filthy because no one had maintained it. My father had missed 2 appointments. There was no food in the house because no one had done the shopping, and everyone was stressed about it. Everyone was overwhelmed by how much had piled up. Everyone needed me to fix it immediately because the situation had become unmanageable. No one apologized for not helping me when I was sick. No one seemed to recognize that maybe I could have used support. It simply didn't occur to them that I might need anything because needing things wasn't part of my role in the family. I fixed everything. I caught up on the bills and cleaned the house and restocked the kitchen and rescheduled the appointments. I did it because not doing it would have meant more chaos, more stress, more problems compounding. That something had changed in me during those 2 weeks. Some internal understanding about the nature of our relationships that I couldn't unknow once I'd recognized it. They didn't actually see me as a person. Not really. They saw me as a resource. I started testing that theory after I recovered. Small tests at first. I stopped volunteering to handle things before being asked. I waited to see if anyone would notice what needed doing and do it themselves. They noticed. But they didn't do it. They just waited until the situation became urgent, then asked me with increasing frustration why I hadn't taken care of it yet. I started saying no to some requests. Not all of them, because I wasn't trying to create crises. But some. The ones that were clearly things other people could handle themselves. Saying no created immediate tension. My mother would get quiet and withdrawn. My father would make comments about how he guessed they'd just have to figure it out themselves, even though their daughter apparently didn't care anymore. My sister would say I was being unfair, that she'd help more if I just asked, even though I'd been asking for years and the help never materialized beyond token gestures. My brother called after my mother apparently complained to him about my new attitude. He asked what was going on with me. He said I seemed different lately, more distant, less willing to be part of the family. He suggested maybe I was depressed. Maybe I should talk to someone. I asked him when he'd last done anything to help our parents beyond occasional phone calls. He said that wasn't fair. He had his own family to take care of, his own responsibilities. He contributed in other ways. What ways? I asked. He couldn't articulate it, but he got defensive. He said I'd always been the one who wanted to be needed. I'd always been the one who inserted myself into situations and then complained about being burdened. If I didn't want to help, I should just stop. No one was forcing me. That conversation clarified a lot. I started planning my exit that night. It took me 6 months to arrange everything. I did it quietly, in small increments that wouldn't raise suspicion. I found an apartment 3 hours away in a city I'd always wanted to live in. I secured it with first month, last month, and deposit, all paid in advance. I arranged for movers. I started gradually boxing up my belongings in ways that weren't obvious. A few boxes in the back of my closet. Some things moved to a storage unit I rented under the premise of decluttering. I opened a new bank account that no one else had access to. I changed my mailing address for anything important. I made copies of documents. I removed my name from any shared accounts or utilities. I did all of this while still functioning in my normal role. Still paying the bills, managing appointments, keeping the household running. I didn't reduce my contribution or create problems. I just quietly prepared for my absence. The hardest part was deciding not to tell them in advance. I knew what would happen if I did. They'd be hurt. They'd be angry. They'd tell me I was overreacting, that things weren't as bad as I was making them out to be, that families help each other and I was being selfish. My mother would cry. My father's health would mysteriously deteriorate. My sister would accuse me of abandoning her. My brother would tell me I was breaking up the family. And I'd feel guilty. And that guilt would trap me into staying, or at least into delaying my departure indefinitely while we all processed feelings and made plans and negotiated terms that would ultimately just recreate the same dynamic with slightly different parameters. So I decided not to give them that opportunity. I waited until they were all going to be gone. My parents had planned a 2-week trip to visit my brother and his family. They'd been talking about it for months. My sister decided at the last minute to go with them, turning it into a big family reunion. They asked if I wanted to come. I said I couldn't get away from work. I had deadlines, projects I couldn't postpone. They were disappointed but understanding. Someone needed to stay home anyway. Someone needed to watch the house and get the mail and make sure everything was secure. Of course. The morning they left, I helped load the car. I hugged everyone goodbye. I waved as they pulled out of the driveway. I went back inside and stood in the quiet house for a long time, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. Then I started moving. The movers came that afternoon. We packed everything efficiently. Furniture, boxes, clothes, books, all my personal belongings. It took about 6 hours to empty my room and remove all traces of my presence from the common areas. The small decorative items I'd bought. The kitchen supplies that were mine. My coffee maker, my laptop, my files and documents. I didn't touch anything that belonged to other people. I didn't take shared items out of spite or retaliation. I just removed myself. When the movers pulled away, I walked through the house one more time. My empty room looked dark. The walls lighter where my shelves had been. The carpet still indented from my bed frame. I felt sadness, but not the way I'd expected. Not grief for the relationship I was leaving behind. More like mourning for the version of myself I'd lost in this house. The person I'd been when I moved in 8 years ago who thought she was being helpful and good and doing the right thing. I left my key on the kitchen counter. No note. Nothing explaining. Just the key. Then I locked the door from inside, walked out through the garage, and pulled the garage door closed behind me. I drove away at 4 in the afternoon. My entire life packed into a truck, heading toward a city where no one knew me and no one needed me and I could be wherever I decided to be. The relief was overwhelming. I cried for the first 2 hours of the drive, but not from sadness. From release. From the sudden absence of weight I'd been carrying for so long that I'd stopped noticing it. I didn't tell them I'd left. I didn't answer the door when anyone came by. I was simply gone. They were gone for 12 days. I spent that time settling into my new apartment, starting my new life. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. I arranged my space exactly how I wanted it. I explored my new neighborhood. I went to coffee shops and sat alone, reading, with no one calling to ask when I'd be home or whether I could handle something urgently. The silence was extraordinary. No one from my family contacted me during those 12 days. Not once. No one called to check in or ask how I was managing alone. No one texted to say they missed me or hoped I was okay. I wasn't surprised, but the totality of it was clarifying. 12 days of their vacation, and it didn't occur to anyone to reach out to the person who was supposedly so central to the family's functioning. They got home on a Thursday afternoon. I know because I'd marked it on my calendar. I'd been curious about how long it would take them to notice I was gone. Whether they'd call immediately, or whether it would take a few hours or maybe even longer. I didn't hear anything Thursday. Nothing Friday. Saturday morning, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. I'd been thinking about blocking their numbers, at least temporarily. But I was curious. So I answered. She sounded cheerful. She said they'd had a wonderful trip. She asked if everything had been okay at the house. She said they brought me back some gifts. She wanted to know if I'd be home for dinner Sunday because she was going to make my favorite meal as a thank you for holding down the fort while they were gone. I asked if she'd been inside the house yet. She said yes, they'd gotten in yesterday afternoon. Why? I didn't say anything. I just waited. She said everything looked fine. Clean, actually. Had I done a deep cleaning while they were away? I told her I didn't live there anymore. There was a long silence. Then she laughed. She said that wasn't funny. She asked what I was talking about. I told her I'd moved out while they were gone. I had an apartment 3 hours away. I wasn't coming back. Another silence. Longer this time. Then she said that was ridiculous. She said my room was still there. My things were still there. She'd just walked past my room this morning. I told her to open the door and look inside. I heard her walking. Heard the door open. Heard her sharp intake of breath. She said she didn't understand. She asked where all my furniture was. Where my belongings were. I told her I'd taken them to my new apartment. She asked why I would do that. Her voice had changed. Less cheerful now. Confused with an edge of panic underneath. I didn't explain. I just said I'd moved out. I was starting fresh somewhere new. I needed a change. She said I couldn't just leave without telling anyone. She said that wasn't how family worked. She said they'd all come home expecting me to be there, and now I was just gone, and how was she supposed to explain that to everyone? I noted that her primary concern seemed to be how my absence would affect her, not whether I was okay or why I'd felt the need to leave so quietly. She said that wasn't fair. Of course she cared about me. But this was such a shock. She didn't understand. Had something happened? Had someone upset me? Was I angry about something? I told her I wasn't angry. I just realized I needed to live my own life. She said I could do that while still being part of the family. She said leaving like this was extreme. She asked me to come back so we could talk about it properly. I said no. She started crying. She said I was breaking her heart. She said she couldn't believe I'd do something so cruel. She'd thought we were close. She'd thought I cared about them. I told her I did care about them, but I needed to care about myself more. She said that was selfish. She said family was supposed to support each other. She said I was abandoning them when they needed me. I asked what specifically they needed from me that they couldn't handle themselves. She couldn't articulate it. She just said there were so many things. So many things I took care of. How were they supposed to manage without me? I suggested they'd figure it out the same way everyone else did. She said I was being cruel. She said this wasn't like me. She asked if I was having some kind of breakdown. I told her I was actually clearer than I'd been in years. I said I needed to go. I said I'd be in touch when I was ready. She begged me not to hang up. She said we needed to talk about this more. She said I couldn't just make a decision like this on my own without considering how it affected everyone else. I told her I'd been considering how my decisions affected everyone else for 8 years. Now I was considering how they affected me. Then I ended the call. She tried calling back immediately. I didn't answer. She called 4 more times in the next hour. Text messages started coming in. From her, from my father, eventually from my sister. All of them confused, hurt, angry. All of them demanding explanations. All of them insisting I come back so we could discuss this as a family. My brother called that evening. His tone was different from the others. Frustrated, impatient. He asked what I thought I was doing. He said I was causing unnecessary drama. He said Mom was hysterical and Dad's blood pressure was up and I needed to stop being ridiculous and come home. I asked why he wasn't coming home to help if things were so dire. He said that wasn't the same thing. He lived 2 states away. I'd been right there. I'd just suddenly abandoned my responsibilities. I asked what responsibilities I'd abandoned. He said I knew what he meant. Taking care of things. Being there for Mom and Dad. Making sure everything ran smoothly. I pointed out that those weren't actually my responsibilities. They were adult people who'd been managing their lives long before I moved in. They could do it again. He said I was being deliberately obtuse. I knew they relied on me. I knew they needed help. Just because I was having some kind of personal crisis didn't mean I got to dump all of that on everyone else. I told him he was welcome to step in if he felt so strongly about their need for support. He said I was being unfair. His life was complicated. He had obligations. He couldn't just drop everything. I said I understood completely. That's why I was no longer dropping everything either. He said it wasn't the same. He'd never positioned himself as the family caretaker. He'd never made himself indispensable and then suddenly withdrawn. I hadn't made myself indispensable. I'd been recruited into that role and then trapped there. And I was tired of it. He said I was writing history. He said I'd always wanted to be needed. I'd always been the one who pushed help. No one had forced me to do any of it. I asked if that was really what he believed. He said yes. He said I'd chosen this. And now I was choosing to hurt everyone by leaving. That was on me. I told him I hoped he was right. I hoped it had been my choice. Because that would mean I could choose differently now. Then I told him not to call me again unless he had something supportive to say. He called me a selfish bitch and hung up. My sister's approach was different. She called crying. She said she couldn't believe I'd left without even saying goodbye. She said she thought we were close. She thought I'd at least care enough to tell her I was leaving. I reminded her that I'd hugged her goodbye before she left for the trip. That had been my goodbye. She said that didn't count. That was a normal goodbye, not a permanent one. She said I'd lied to her. I'd let her think everything was fine when I was planning to disappear. I asked why my living situation was something she'd need advance notice about. She didn't live in my room. She wasn't paying my rent. My presence or absence didn't change her daily life in any material way. She said that wasn't true. She said I was always there. I was part of her life. My leaving changed everything. I asked how. She said it just did. She said everything felt different now. She said she felt betrayed. I asked what I'd done that constituted betrayal. She said leaving without warning was betrayal. She said making everyone worry was betrayal. She said not caring about how this affected people was betrayal. I pointed out that no one had worried about me. No one had even noticed I was gone until they needed something. Not one person had called me during their vacation just to check in. Not one person had wondered if I was okay being alone for nearly 2 weeks. She said that wasn't fair. She said she'd been busy. She said she'd assumed I was fine because I was always fine. I said that was exactly the problem. She didn't understand. She said I wasn't making sense. She said I was being dramatic and hurtful, and she didn't know why I was doing this. I told her I was doing it because I needed to. Because staying was making me disappear. Because I'd stopped existing as a person separate from my function in the household. She said that was ridiculous. She said I was making everything about me. She said families were supposed to help each other, and I was acting like any request for help was some kind of abuse. I asked when she'd last helped me with anything. She said she helped all the time. She did things. She contributed. I asked for examples. She couldn't provide any. Not specific ones. She said she did things when asked. She said if I needed help, I should have said something. I told her I'd said something for years. No one listened. She said I was being unfair. She said I was twisting everything to make them look bad. She said she was a good sister and I was throwing that away over nothing. I told her I hoped she was right. I hoped it was nothing. That would make moving on easier. She said I was cold. She said she didn't even recognize me anymore. She said the sister she knew would never do something like this. I told her maybe she'd never really known me at all. Maybe she'd only known the version of me that served a purpose for her. She hung up crying. The messages continued for weeks. Voicemails, texts, emails. All of them following similar patterns. Hurt, confusion, anger, guilt-tripping. Accusations of selfishness and betrayal. Demands that I explain myself. Insistence that I owe them a conversation, an apology, a chance to make things right. I didn't respond to most of them. I read them, then archived them. Watching the progression was interesting in a detached way. The evolution from hurt, confusion to anger to attempted manipulation. My mother's messages were the most frequent. She'd go from sad to angry to pleading, sometimes within the same voicemail. She'd tell me she didn't understand how I could do this to her. She'd say she'd obviously failed as a mother if I felt the need to cut them out so completely. She'd ask what she could do to fix things. She'd demand I come back immediately. She'd say she was worried about me. She'd say I was being cruel. She never once asked if I was okay. Not really. She asked if something was wrong with me, if I was having a breakdown, if I needed professional help. But she never asked if I was okay in the sense of genuinely caring about my well-being. Her concern was always framed around my mental state being the explanation for behavior she found incomprehensible. My father's messages were shorter and angrier. He said I'd disappointed him. He said this wasn't how he'd raise me. He said family meant commitment and loyalty, not running away when things got difficult. He said I was weak and selfish. He never once acknowledged that maybe things had gotten difficult for me. That possibility simply didn't enter his framework. My brother sent a few more messages after his initial angry call, mostly forwarded complaints from our mother. He'd say she was taking this really hard. He'd say Dad's health was suffering from the stress. He'd say my sister was struggling. All of it positioned as my fault, my responsibility to fix. Never once did it seem to occur to him that he could go help them if things were so bad. My sister's messages were the most manipulative, though I don't think she realized it. She'd send me pictures from family events I was missing. She'd tell me about things happening at the house. She'd say she wished I was there. She'd remind me of good memories we had together. She'd say she missed me. But embedded in all of it was a clear message: look what you're losing. Look what you're giving up. Look what you're throwing away. She never seemed to consider that maybe I'd already lost it years ago. That maybe what I was giving up was the pretense that it had ever really been there. I did respond occasionally, but only to logistical matters. When they asked for information about accounts I'd been managing, I provided it. When they needed passwords or login information, I sent it. When they asked about doctors or service providers or other household contacts, I gave them the details. I didn't engage with the emotional content. I didn't defend myself or explain my reasoning or try to make them understand. I just provided facts when necessary and ignored everything else. That seemed to frustrate them more than anything. They wanted to fight. They wanted engagement. They wanted me to either justify myself so they could argue against my justification, or apologize so they could forgive me and reestablish the old dynamic. I gave them neither. After about 6 weeks, the messages started to decrease in frequency. Not because they'd accepted my departure, but because they'd started to realize I wasn't coming back. The tone shifted from trying to get me to return to focusing on how they were managing without me. My mother would send updates about how she'd figured out the bills, how she's learned to use the online portals, how she'd managed to coordinate Dad's appointments herself. There was pride in these messages, but also a subtle undercurrent of accusation. See, we didn't really need you after all. We're doing fine without you. I was glad they were managing. That had been the point. My sister sent me pictures of her new job. She'd finally gotten serious about her career and found something she was genuinely excited about. She was moving out, getting her own place. She said she wished I could see it, but understood I probably didn't care. I did care. I was happy for her. But I also noted that all of this progress had only happened after I left. That as long as I'd been there, functioning as a safety net, she'd had no incentive to develop her own stability. My father's health remained stable. No mysterious flare-ups. No urgent crises. He continued his normal routine without incident. My brother stopped messaging me entirely after about 2 months. I assumed he'd said what he wanted to say and saw no point in further communication. The holidays were difficult, but not in the way I expected. I didn't miss the gatherings. I didn't feel sad about not being there. What I felt was relief that I didn't have to perform family harmony. Relief that I didn't have to manage everyone's expectations and mediate everyone's conflicts and make sure everything ran smoothly. I spent Thanksgiving alone in my apartment, eating takeout and watching movies. It was quiet and peaceful and exactly what I needed. Christmas I spent with some new friends I'd made in the city. People who knew me only as I was now, not as who I'd been. People who had no expectations about who I should be or what I should provide. It felt surprisingly normal. Like this was how holidays were supposed to feel. Relaxed. Optional. Not mandatory performances of connection that didn't actually exist. My family sent gifts. I didn't send any back. That probably seemed cruel, but I didn't know what to send. Anything I chose would be wrong. Too personal would suggest I wanted to rebuild the relationship. Too impersonal would be an insult. Nothing felt like the right message. So I sent nothing, which sent its own message. The gifts they sent were generic. Gift cards mostly. Things that required no knowledge of who I was or what I liked. More evidence that they'd never really known me as a person, only as a function. Around February, about 5 months after I'd left, my mother called and I actually answered. I'm not sure why. Maybe I was feeling stable enough in my new life that I thought I could handle the conversation. Maybe I was curious whether anything had changed. Her tone was different this time. Less angry, less desperate. More resigned. She said they'd been talking, all of them. They'd been trying to understand why I'd left the way I did. She said they still didn't really understand, but they were trying. I waited. She said she wanted to apologize for some of the things she'd said. She said she'd been hurt and angry and maybe hadn't been fair. She said she could see now that I must have been struggling more than she'd realized. It was something, I suppose. Not exactly accountability, but closer than I expected. I asked if she understood what I'd been struggling with. She said she thought so. She said she knew I'd felt overwhelmed sometimes. She said she wished I'd talked to them about it instead of just leaving. I told her I had talked about it. For years. In small ways and large. In hints and direct statements. And nothing had changed. She said that wasn't fair. She said they tried to help when I asked. I asked for examples. She couldn't provide any real ones. Just vague references to times they'd offered to do something, usually in response to me being visibly stressed about something. I pointed out that offering to help occasionally wasn't the same as actually sharing responsibility. It wasn't the same as noticing what needed doing and doing it without being asked. She said she hadn't realized I felt that way. She said I always seemed like I had everything under control. She said she thought I liked being the one everyone relied on. I asked why she thought that. She said because I never said I didn't. Because I kept doing everything. Because I seemed capable. I told her capability wasn't consent. Just because I could do something didn't mean I wanted to do it forever. Just because I didn't collapse under the weight didn't mean I wasn't being crushed by it. She was quiet for a while. Then she said she was sorry. She said she hadn't meant to take me for granted. She said she hadn't realized how much I was carrying. I believe she meant it. But I also knew it didn't change anything. Recognizing a problem wasn't the same as being willing to change the patterns that created it. I asked what was different now. How were they managing the things I used to handle? She said they distributed the responsibilities. Dad was managing his own medications now. My sister had taken over the grocery shopping before she moved out, and now Mom was doing it herself. They'd hired someone to help with bills and paperwork. My brother had started calling more regularly to check in. So they'd figured it out. They'd found ways to handle everything without me, which meant they'd always been capable of it. They'd just chosen not to be because it was easier to rely on me. I didn't say that out loud, but I thought it. My mother asked if I'd consider coming for a visit. She said they all wanted to see me. She said they missed me. I told her I wasn't ready for that yet. Maybe eventually, but not yet. She asked when I thought I might be ready. I said I didn't know. I said I needed more time to figure out who I was outside of the role I'd been playing. She said she didn't understand what that meant. I said I knew. That was part of the problem. She asked if I was happier now. I said yes. Much happier. She said she was glad even though she didn't understand it. She said she hoped eventually I'd be willing to be part of the family again. I told her I'd never stop being part of the family. I'd just stop being their caretaker. Those weren't the same thing. She said they felt the same to her. I said that was something she might want to think about. We ended the call amicably enough. She said she loved me. I said I loved her too. We agreed to talk again sometime. I don't know if we will. Not regularly, anyway. Maybe occasionally. Maybe for holidays eventually. but not in a way we used to talk, where every conversation was really a transfer of information about tasks and responsibilities and things I needed to handle. That conversation clarified something for me. They weren't malicious. They weren't evil. They'd just gotten comfortable with a dynamic that worked well for them and hadn't looked closely at whether it worked well for me. And I'd let them. I'd enabled it by continuing to function in that role long past the point where it became harmful to me. I'd thought staying was virtuous. I'd thought leaving would be selfish. But staying had been killing me slowly. So slowly I hadn't noticed until I'd almost disappeared entirely. I've been in my new city for almost a year now. I've built a life that's entirely mine. I have a job I'm good at, friends who know me as a whole person, hobbies I've rekindled, interests I'm exploring. I make decisions based on what I want, not on who needs what from me. I still feel guilty sometimes. That programming runs deep. I'll see something that reminds me of my family and feel a pang of shame for leaving the way I did. For not being there. For choosing myself. But then I remember what my life was like before. How small I'd become. How invisible. How every day felt like moving through thick water, all my energy going toward keeping everyone else afloat. And I remember that I couldn't save them by drowning myself. That I wasn't actually helping them by never letting them learn to swim on their own. They're fine now. They figured it out. They developed capabilities they'd allowed to atrophy because it was easier to rely on me. And I'm fine now too. Better than fine. I don't know if I'll ever go back to visit. Maybe someday, when enough time has passed that we can interact as adults who care about each other rather than as a support system and the person being depleted by it. But maybe not. Maybe the healthy thing is to let that part of my life remain in the past. To honor the years I gave them without continuing to give more. I've learned that you can love people and still need to leave them. That family doesn't mean unlimited access to your time and energy. That being needed isn't the same as being valued. I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is to force them to stand on their own. And I've learned that you can't find yourself while you're busy being whoever everyone else needs you to be. Leaving felt impossible for years. It felt selfish and wrong and cruel. But staying would have been worse. Staying would have been the real cruelty. To myself, yes. But also to them, because I'd have eventually come to resent them so deeply that there'd be no relationship left to salvage. At least this way, there's possibility. Possibility that someday we'll find a way to relate to each other that doesn't require me to disappear. Possibility that they'll come to understand why I left. Possibility that we'll build something new that's healthier for everyone. Or maybe we won't. Maybe this is the end of those relationships in any meaningful form. Either way, I made the right choice. I know that now. The relief hasn't faded. The peace hasn't dissolved. Every day I wake up in this apartment I chose, in this city I wanted, living this life I designed, and I feel the rightness of it. They wanted me to come back. They wanted me to explain. They wanted me to apologize. But I don't owe them those things. I don't owe them my presence or my energy or my constant availability. I owe myself the chance to exist as something other than useful. So I took it. And I'm not sorry. If you've ever felt trapped by being needed, if you've ever realized that the people who rely on you don't actually see you, if you've ever wondered what would happen if you just stopped being available, I hope my story helps somehow. I hope it reminds you that leaving is possible. That choosing yourself isn't betrayal. That you're allowed to want more than being useful. You're allowed to just be.